In today's tutorial, we shall be learning how to color grade an image using the curves adjustment layer in Photoshop. Now, color grading is simply adding a color theme or a color palette to an image to help you tell your story. That's simple. And you'll notice that the color theme that you end up using is entirely dependent on your style or your mood. But you'll notice that you'll end up using colors that are known to work well with each other. And for the purposes of this tutorial, I want to make it easy and only stick to the complementary color scheme. Yellows, oranges, reds, and magentas are where you'll find your highlights and skin tones, no matter the ethnicity or the skin complexion of your subject. The complementary hues to these are greens, teals, cyans, and blues, like we can see in this representation palette over here. So today we shall try to emulate the popular teal and orange look, where we have blues in the shadows and oranges in the highlights and skin tones. So jumping to the world of Photoshop, we shall be using or working with this image right over here, and we are going to be using the curves adjustment layer. So I will go to the new adjustment layer icon and pick the curves adjustment layer. So you'll notice that when I'm working with the curves adjustment layer, if I go ahead and make drastic changes, you'll notice that I'm not only affecting the luminosity in the image, but I'm also adjusting the colors. If I come back here and change my blend mode to luminosity, now notice what happens. The skin tones changes in color and becomes more pale. If I go back to normal, then there is a lot more saturation in the skin tones. So to avoid this, I will set my blend mode to color, and this will ensure that any adjustments I make will only affect the color and not the luminosity in the image. Let me just reset that. And for the purposes of this tutorial, we are not going to need the layer mask, so I will drag it and delete it. Now to start us off, I will go to my background layer and I will make a selection that will only target the model's skin. So I will pick my quick selection tool, click and drag to select the skins. You'll notice that I'm not being so precise with this, and if in the event that you select areas that you don't want, just hold down the Alt key, then click and drag to do away with those areas that you don't want to select. Just like that. Include even the thumbnails over here. So Alt and then click, Alt or Option in the mark, click and drag to do away with the areas you don't want to select. We also include his face over here. So I'm just making a quick selection. You can go ahead and refine yours and make it as precise as you want to. So Alt and do away with that. We are almost done with our selection. Let me just add this area over here, his arms. I missed an area over here. Okay, so this looks good. Let me just include his nose so that we don't leave out any skin tones. And like I've said, you can be as precise as you want with your selection. I'm just doing this quickly. His beard over here. Oops. So Alt or Option mark, then click and drag to do away with that. So once you're satisfied with that selection, click on your curves adjustment layer, then go down here and click on the layer mask. So it creates a new layer mask with the selected skin in it. And if I go back to my curves thumbnail and I make adjustments, you'll notice that whatever adjustment I make now only affects the skin. And because I want my adjustments to go to the background, because I want to add some blue and teal and then orange highlights over here, I'll go back to my layer mask thumbnail and then click on invert. So this way, any changes I make will only affect the background and not the selected skin. So let me reset that to take us back to the original curve. To start building our look, I will go and pick the blue channel. Make sure your targeted adjustment tool over here is selected. Pick the blue channel and make sure your blend mode is on color. If you're on normal, then make sure you change to color so that any changes we make will only affect the colors and not the luminosity. So with my blue channel picked, I will hover over the image, pick an area where I want to add the blues, click and drag up to add the blues, not so much. Up to that point looks good. And then in the highlights or the lighter areas where I don't want the blues, I will click and drag down to remove the blues. Notice it is also seeping into his t-shirt, so I will click, drag down to remove the blues from that area. That looks good. Then I'll go to the red channel. Again, pick on a dark area. Click and drag down to remove the red and add cyan to the image. The opposite of red is cyan, so when you drag down to remove the red, you're adding more cyan to the image. Then I'll go to the lighter areas, click and drag up to introduce more red and make it warmer. Also on his t-shirt, click and drag up. And that looks good up to that point. Now you'll notice that we have a lot of lighter blue shades, but we want the shady areas or the dark areas to have a lot more teal. So I will go to my green channel, then again pick on a dark area, click and drag up to introduce more green and make it more teal. Then I'll go to my lighter areas, click and drag down to remove the green and add more magenta to make it warm, just like that. So if we check on our before and after, we are already building our look. It's coming up pretty much very well. Now let us go ahead and start working on the model's skin. We want to make it pop and have more oranges and yellows in his skin tone. So to do that, I will duplicate my curves adjustment layer, Control J, Command J on the Mac to duplicate. And then I will reset it to bring it back to the original curve, just like that. And because I want to target the background, I want to target the model skin tone and not the background, I will click on the layer mask and then click on invert. So any changes we make from now on this layer will only affect the selected skin and not the background. So I want to add more red to his skin tone. I will click on my curves layer, pick my red channel, hover over my image. Notice that my targeted adjustment tool is still selected. So I'll hover over my image, pick an area like that, click and drag upwards to introduce some red. Not so much, just a little bit. One pointer is that when you're color grading, a little bit goes a long way. So don't make drastic changes because it will ruin your image and make it look funny. Let's also pick the blue channel. Again, hover over the image, click and drag down to introduce some yellow and more oranges to his skin tone. Just about that looks good. And on the green channel, I'll again click and drag down to add a little bit of magenta to his skin, not so much. Up to that point looks good. Now let us look at the before and after the skin is popping. And if you feel you've gone too far with the effect, you can always come to the opacity, click and drag to the left to bring it down just a tad. I'll leave it at 91, looks good. At this point, I can now add a luminosity layer. So I will go down here and add a new curves adjustment layer. I will change my blend mode to luminosity. so that any changes I make will only affect the luminance values in the image. Then I will hover over the image, a dark area like this, click and drag down to bring down the darker areas even more. And then I'll click on our model, click and drag up just to brighten him up a bit and to add a little more contrast to the image. Now up to this point, I can go ahead and make more refinements to the image, but I think you already have a good idea of what you need to do to get your image to this point, the teal and orange block pastel look. We have reds and oranges in the skin tones and highlights, and in the shadows we have blues and teals. So we have managed to create this look, the teal and orange complementary look, easily by just using the curves adjustment layer in Photoshop. Now I will hold down Shift, click on the top, then the bottom layer, and then Control G or Command G on the Mac to group them up, and then I will rename it to teal orange. Quite easy, don't you think? Now that is where you go ahead and hit the subscribe button for me, and also leave a like to the video because it helps a lot. And if that was interesting, then there is a lot more interesting stuff over here. Go ahead and check out how to isolate and edit skin tones in Capture One Pro.